There is a reason your life started changing the moment you almost went back. You felt it, didn't you? That strange heaviness in your chest the night you sat alone in your apartment with only the kitchen light on, your phone glowing against the darkness, your thumb hovering over a message you promised yourself you would never send again. It was after midnight. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. And for a moment, you seriously considered returning to the very thing that once drained the life out of you. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a place. Maybe it was an old version of yourself you secretly missed because at least it felt familiar. But something stopped you. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to interrupt the moment. Your phone battery suddenly dropped to 1% even though you could have sworn it was charged. A strange exhaustion hit your body out of nowhere. The kind that made you put the phone face down and stare at the ceiling instead. You thought it meant nothing. But deep down, part of you knew that night mattered. Because ever since then, nothing has felt the same. The conversations that once comforted you now feel empty. The places you used to run toward suddenly feel distant. Even the people around you can sense something changed, though they can't explain it. And honestly, neither can you. That's the part that's been haunting you the most. Not the loss itself, but the confusion. Because you tried to move forward. You tried to be positive. You told yourself everything happens for a reason. But late at night, when the distractions fade and the silence gets too loud, your mind keeps replaying the same question over and over again. Why did everything fall apart right when you thought it was finally coming together? Why did the door close so suddenly? Why did the timing feel so cruel? And the harder you tried to find an answer, the quieter everything became. No clear sign. No explanation. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes a person question themselves. Maybe you even started wondering if you ruined something good. Maybe you blamed yourself for walking away. Maybe you convinced yourself that if you had just waited longer, tried harder, said the right thing, things would have turned out differently. But what if the silence was never punishment? What if the reason you couldn't go back had nothing to do with rejection and everything to do with protection? Because there are moments in life when something greater than your emotions quietly steps in between you and the thing you're desperately trying to hold on to. Not to hurt you, but to keep you from becoming trapped in a future that would have slowly broken you down piece by piece. And the strange part is, your spirit usually feels this long before your mind understands it. That uneasy feeling. That resistance. That sudden delay. That exhaustion before making the wrong decision. You called it anxiety. You called it bad timing. But maybe it was the first sign that your life was already being redirected the moment you thought you were losing everything. The strange thing is, nobody around you really noticed how much you were changing. You still answered texts. You still showed up to work. You still smiled when people asked how you were doing. But inside, something felt disconnected, like your soul had quietly stepped back from everything while your body kept going through the motions out of habit. And the more you tried to ignore it, the heavier it became. A few mornings later, you woke up before sunrise without knowing why. The apartment was cold. The digital clock beside your bed read 4:11 a.m. You stared at the ceiling for a while, hoping sleep would come back, but your mind would not slow down. Memories kept surfacing without permission. Small things. The sound of someone laughing in another room months ago. The smell of coffee from a diner you used to stop at every Friday morning. The feeling of sitting in your car outside a grocery store parking lot, convincing yourself not to cry before walking inside like everything was normal. It was exhausting carrying emotions nobody else could see. That was the part people never understood. They saw your silence and assumed you were healing. They saw distance and assumed you were moving on. But what they did not see were the nights you sat on the edge of your bed replaying old conversations in your head, wondering if you misunderstood everything. Wondering if maybe you gave up too soon. There was one moment you kept returning to more than any other. The afternoon you almost changed your mind. You had your keys in your hand. You were ready to drive 30 miles across town just to hear familiar words one more time. You remember standing by the front door while the television played softly in the background. Then out of nowhere, this strange feeling came over you. Not fear exactly. More like resistance. Like every part of your body suddenly became heavy. Your chest tightened. Your stomach dropped. And instead of leaving, you sat back down on the couch and stared out the window for almost an hour while rain rolled slowly down the glass. At the time, you hated yourself for it. You thought you were weak. You thought hesitation was the reason your life stayed stuck. But what if that moment was not weakness at all? What if something deep inside you already knew what your heart was refusing to accept? Because sometimes the hardest thing to understand is that people can miss what damaged them simply because it once made them feel less alone. And loneliness has a way of making old pain look comforting. That is why you almost went back. Not because it was right for you, but because silence can make even unhealthy things feel familiar after enough time passes. And lately, the silence has been louder than ever. You feel it when you walk into your apartment after a long day and nobody is there. You feel it driving home at night with the radio low and the highway lights stretching endlessly ahead of you. You feel it in the grocery store when you catch yourself reaching for two of something before remembering it is just you now. Those moments seem small, but they add up. They make a person question everything. They make a person wonder if they are falling behind while the rest of the world keeps moving forward. But there is something else happening beneath all of this, something quieter than fear and deeper than confusion. And whether you realize it yet or not, your life has already started separating you from the version of yourself that was willing to settle for less just to avoid being alone. By the end of that week, even familiar places started feeling different to you. The coffee shop you used to stop at every morning no longer felt comforting. The waitress still smiled when she handed you the same medium coffee in the same white paper cup, but something inside you stayed distant, like your mind was somewhere else entirely. You would sit near the window watching strangers rush past in heavy jackets while the early winter air fogged the glass, wondering how everyone else seemed so certain about where they were going. Meanwhile, you felt suspended between two versions of your life, unable to return to the old one but still unable to clearly see what came next. That uncertainty was starting to wear you down in ways nobody else noticed. You became quieter. More withdrawn. Some nights you would drive for nearly an hour with no destination, just taking empty roads outside the city because movement felt easier than sitting alone with your thoughts. And every time you slowed down long enough to think clearly, the same temptation returned. Go back. Reopen the conversation. Revisit the past one more time. Maybe things could still be fixed. Maybe you misunderstood the signs. Maybe the closed doors were not actually closed at all. But every time you got close to reaching backward, something interrupted you. One night your car would not start for nearly 10 minutes even though the battery was fine the next morning. Another time you finally worked up the courage to send a message, only to notice the screen freeze right before you pressed send. Small things. Explainable things. Yet together they formed a pattern your heart could not completely ignore. And still, part of you resisted believing any of it meant something because accepting that possibility would force you to admit something painful. The life you kept trying to return to was already disappearing. Deep down, you knew it. You felt it during the quiet moments no distraction could cover up. Especially late at night when your apartment filled with that strange stillness that always seemed heavier after 11 p.m. You would stand in the kitchen pouring a glass of water while the microwave clock blinked softly in the dark, and suddenly memories would hit you all at once. The good moments. The promises. The plans you once built your future around. And for a few seconds, your chest would ache so badly you almost convinced yourself to run back toward all of it just to stop feeling alone. But then another feeling would surface underneath the sadness. A quieter feeling. One you could never fully explain. Relief. Not complete relief. Just enough to confuse you. Enough to make you wonder why part of your spirit felt calmer every time distance grew wider between you and the thing you thought you needed most. That contradiction became impossible to ignore. How could losing something hurt this much while also feeling strangely necessary at the same time? That question followed you everywhere now. It sat with you during traffic lights. It echoed through grocery store aisles. It lingered in silence after phone calls ended. And slowly, without realizing it, you started noticing something else too. The person you used to be was fading. The version of you that tolerated mixed signals, emotional exhaustion, and constant uncertainty just to keep someone close was becoming harder and harder to recognize. You were changing in ways that felt uncomfortable because growth rarely announces itself with confidence at first. Sometimes it arrives quietly through separation, confusion, and exhaustion. Sometimes it feels less like becoming and more like losing pieces of yourself before you understand why they needed to go. And what frightened you most was not the pain of letting go anymore. It was the growing realization that if the old doors suddenly opened again tomorrow, you were no longer sure you could walk back through them even if you wanted to. One evening, after another long shift that left your mind exhausted and your body running on autopilot, you stopped at a gas station just outside town because the fuel light had been on for miles. The air was cold enough to sting your hands as you stepped out of the car, and the entire place felt strangely empty except for the buzzing fluorescent lights above the pumps. You remember standing there watching your breath disappear into the dark while some old song played faintly from the station speakers, and out of nowhere, this overwhelming sadness hit you so hard you had to lean against the side of your car for a second just to steady yourself. Not because of one specific thing. It was everything all at once. The waiting. The confusion. The exhaustion of trying to understand why your life no longer felt connected to the future you once imagined so clearly. You kept asking yourself what changed. When did everything start slipping away? Because there was a time when you truly believed certain people would stay. Certain plans would work out. Certain dreams were only a matter of time. And now here you were, standing alone under flickering lights at nearly midnight, wondering how your life became something you barely recognized. The hardest part was not even the loneliness anymore. It was the uncertainty. The feeling that something invisible kept interrupting every attempt you made to rebuild the life you thought you wanted. And lately, those interruptions had become impossible to ignore. Opportunities that seemed perfect would suddenly disappear. Plans would collapse at the last minute. Conversations would shift in strange ways you never saw coming. At first, you blamed yourself for all of it. You thought maybe you were too emotional. Too indecisive. Too damaged by the past to move forward correctly. But deep down, another possibility had quietly started forming in the back of your mind. What if not everything falling apart was meant to destroy you? That thought scared you because if it were true, it would mean the pain had purpose. It would mean the delays were not random. And honestly, part of you did not know whether to feel comforted or terrified by that realization. Later that same night, you drove home through nearly empty streets while light rain blurred the windshield and the glow from traffic signals reflected softly across the dashboard. You passed the apartment complex where you used to spend so much time, and instinctively your eyes drifted toward it even though you told yourself not to look. For a moment, memories rushed back so vividly it almost felt physical. The laughter. The conversations that lasted until 2 in the morning. The promises that once sounded permanent. And suddenly your chest tightened again, not because you wanted the past exactly as it was, but because part of you missed who you used to be before everything became so uncertain. Before silence replaced clarity. Before every decision started feeling heavy. You sat at the red light longer than usual, staring at those familiar windows glowing in the distance, and that old temptation returned one more time. Turn around. Go back. Try again. But then something strange happened. The light changed green, yet the car in front of you did not move for several seconds. Just enough time for another thought to rise quietly inside you. If you keep returning to what drained you, you will never discover who you are becoming without it. The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it came, but it stayed with you the entire drive home. And for the first time in weeks, you stopped asking why certain doors closed and started wondering what kind of future would require them to stay closed in the first place. The next few days felt strangely heavier, almost like life itself was slowing you down on purpose. Simple things started taking more energy than they should have. You would wake up tired even after 8 hours of sleep. You stopped replying to messages as quickly. Some evenings you would sit in your car outside your apartment for 20 minutes before going inside because the silence waiting behind the front door felt too overwhelming to face right away. And yet, despite how lonely everything felt, there was also this growing awareness deep inside you that something was shifting beneath the surface. You could feel it most during the quiet moments. Early mornings before sunrise. Long drives home with the radio barely audible. Those moments when the world around you softened enough for your thoughts to finally catch up with you. One Saturday afternoon, you decided to clean out the hallway closet because you were tired of avoiding the mess inside it. At first it felt like a distraction more than anything else. Just another way to keep your mind occupied. But halfway through sorting old boxes and winter jackets, you found a small paper bag shoved into the back corner. Inside were receipts, old movie tickets, faded photographs, and random little reminders from a version of your life you barely recognized anymore. For a while you just sat there on the floor staring at everything spread out around you. It was strange how objects could hold entire seasons of your life inside them. One photograph stopped you completely. You remembered the exact day it was taken. The weather had been warm. You were smiling in a way you had not smiled in a long time. Back then you truly believed you had finally found the life you were supposed to live. Looking at that picture now made your chest ache because you remembered how desperately you fought to keep everything from changing. You ignored warning signs. You tolerated exhaustion. You convinced yourself that struggle was proof of commitment instead of proof that something was slowly breaking your spirit down. And suddenly another memory surfaced, one you had avoided for months. The night you drove home feeling completely drained after pretending everything was fine for hours. You remembered gripping the steering wheel so tightly your hands hurt while trying to stop yourself from crying at a red light because deep down you already knew something was wrong. Not just with the relationship or the situation itself, but with who you were becoming inside it. Smaller. More anxious. Constantly afraid of losing people who were already emotionally halfway gone. That realization hit differently now. Because for the first time, you stopped romanticizing the past long enough to see it clearly. Yes, there were beautiful moments. Yes, there were memories you would probably always carry. But there was also exhaustion. Confusion. Emotional loneliness even when someone else was sitting right beside you. And maybe that was the part you kept forgetting whenever nostalgia tried to pull you backward. Nostalgia has a dangerous way of editing out the pain and replaying only the comfort. But your spirit remembers everything. Your heart tries to rewrite. That is why certain things no longer fit you the way they once did. That is why returning has started feeling heavier than moving forward, even when moving forward scares you. Somewhere along the way, your soul became tired of surviving situations that looked good from the outside while quietly draining you underneath. And maybe that exhaustion was not weakness after all. Maybe it was the first sign that you were finally beginning to outgrow the things you once begged to keep. A few nights later, the storm finally came. Not outside, but inside you. It started after a simple conversation that should not have affected you as much as it did. Someone casually mentioned a name you had spent months trying not to think about, and suddenly everything you worked so hard to suppress came rushing back all at once. The memories. The questions. The regret. By the time you got home, your chest felt tight with emotions you could no longer organize into words. You dropped your keys onto the kitchen counter, turned off every light except the one above the stove, and stood there in silence staring at nothing while rain hammered against the windows harder than you had heard in weeks. It felt like the entire world had slowed down just long enough for you to finally admit the truth to yourself. Part of you was still grieving a life you secretly hoped would return. That realization broke something open inside you because you had spent so much time pretending you were already healed. Pretending you had accepted everything. But healing is not linear, and some nights the loneliness becomes so loud it convinces you to romanticize the very things that once exhausted your soul. You felt that temptation stronger than ever that night. You picked up your phone more than once. You opened old messages you should have deleted months ago. You stared at photographs until your eyes blurred. And for nearly an hour, you sat there battling yourself internally, trying to decide whether reaching backward would finally bring relief or just reopen wounds that never fully closed. The terrifying part was how convincing the past suddenly sounded in moments like these. Your mind kept replaying only the warmth, only the comfort, only the feeling of not being alone. But somewhere underneath the emotions, another voice kept quietly interrupting your thoughts. Not with fear. Not with judgment. Just with truth. It reminded you how drained you used to feel after certain conversations. How anxious you became trying to hold everything together. How often you ignored your own exhaustion because you were afraid of disappointing people who were slowly pulling away anyway. You remembered nights lying awake wondering why love suddenly felt like constant uncertainty. You remembered the heaviness that followed you everywhere back then, the kind you blamed on stress because facing the deeper truth felt too painful. And suddenly the memories started changing shape. You were no longer seeing only what you lost. You were finally seeing what it cost you to keep holding on to it. That shift terrified you because it meant the separation may not have been destroying your life the way you once believed. It may have been saving it. You sank down onto the couch, phone still in your hand, while thunder rolled softly in the distance and the apartment filled with that strange silence again. But this silence felt different. Less empty. Almost protective. Like something unseen was giving you space to finally hear your own spirit clearly for the first time in months. And in that quiet moment, another realization slowly surfaced. Every time you almost returned to the old life, something interrupted you. Delays. Exhaustion. Closed doors. Miscommunication. Resistance you could never fully explain. At first you thought those things were obstacles keeping you from happiness. But what if they were barriers keeping you from deeper pain? What if the reason everything became so difficult was because your soul already knew what your heart was still trying to negotiate with? That thought stayed with you long after the storm outside faded. Because for the first time, you stopped seeing your loneliness as evidence that you were abandoned and started wondering if you were simply being separated from what no longer aligned with the person you were becoming. After that night, something subtle but undeniable began changing inside you. The world around you still looked the same on the surface. You still drove the same roads to work each morning. You still passed the same stores, the same intersections, the same familiar faces who had no idea how much your inner world had shifted. But internally, it felt like you were standing at the edge of a life that no longer fit the person you were becoming. And that realization was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Because once you begin seeing things clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee them. One cold morning before dawn, you stopped at a diner off the highway on your way home after picking up an extra shift. The place was nearly empty except for an older man drinking coffee alone near the counter and a waitress wiping down tables while soft country music played overhead. You sat in the far booth by the window, exhausted in a way sleep could not fix, staring at steam rising from your coffee while snow flurries drifted slowly beneath the streetlights outside. And for some reason, sitting there in that quiet little diner at nearly 5 in the morning, you suddenly realized how long you had been surviving instead of living. You had spent months emotionally negotiating with things your spirit had already outgrown. Relationships that kept you anxious. Situations that drained your peace. Memories that only felt beautiful because loneliness kept editing out the pain attached to them. That truth settled heavily inside you because it forced you to confront something uncomfortable. Part of you had mistaken familiarity for destiny. You thought constantly returning to the same emotional cycles meant you cared deeply, when in reality it often meant you were afraid to release what once made you feel wanted. And fear has a way of convincing people to hold onto things long after they stop being healthy. As you sat there quietly turning the coffee cup in your hands, your mind drifted back to all the moments life seemed to interrupt your plans. The missed opportunities that devastated you at the time. The unanswered calls. The delayed responses. The plans that unexpectedly fell apart. You remembered how personal those moments felt when they happened. How rejected you felt. How confused you became watching doors close that you prayed so hard would stay open. But now, looking back from where you stood emotionally, a strange pattern was beginning to emerge. Every path you desperately tried to force eventually led to deeper exhaustion. Every situation you begged to keep eventually revealed cracks you were too emotionally attached to acknowledge in the moment. And maybe that was the part you were finally ready to admit. Not every closed door was a loss. Some were exits. Some were rescue disguised as disappointment. The realization hit quietly but deeply. You did not lose certain things because you were unworthy. You lost them because your future could not survive if you stayed emotionally tied to environments that slowly erased your sense of peace. And suddenly the silence that once felt so cruel began feeling different. Less like abandonment. More like distance being created for your protection. Even the loneliness started making a strange kind of sense. Because sometimes isolation is not punishment. Sometimes it is the space required for a person to finally hear themselves clearly again after too much noise for too long. You sat there for nearly an hour watching snow collect along the edge of the parking lot while the sky slowly lightened into early morning gray, and for the first time in a long while, you stopped asking why everything had to change. Instead, another question quietly surfaced inside you. What if your life was never falling apart at all? What if it was finally pulling you away from everything that could no longer go where you were being led next? The truth finally reached you on an ordinary Tuesday night when you were not even looking for it. You had just gotten home after another long day that left your mind too exhausted to keep fighting with itself. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of the heater clicking softly in the background, and for once you did not turn on the television or reach for your phone to distract yourself from the silence. You simply sat on the floor beside the couch with your back against the wall, letting the stillness settle around you instead of trying to escape it. And somewhere in that silence, pieces finally started connecting in a way they never had before. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just slowly enough for your heart to actually absorb it. Every time you begged for something to stay, your peace disappeared. Every time you forced yourself to hold onto someone or something that no longer felt right deep inside, your anxiety increased. Your sleep became restless. Your thoughts became heavier. You lost pieces of yourself trying to preserve connections that were already fading. And suddenly, you realized the most painful thing of all. The version of you that desperately wanted the past back was also the version of you that constantly felt emotionally exhausted, uncertain, and afraid. That realization sat heavily in your chest because for months you had convinced yourself you were grieving happiness when in reality you were grieving familiarity. There is a difference between the two, even though loneliness often blurs them together. You stood up and walked toward the kitchen, pouring yourself a glass of water while cold rain tapped gently against the windows again, almost exactly like the night everything first started shifting inside you. And then another memory surfaced unexpectedly. A conversation from months earlier that you had almost forgotten. Someone once told you, very casually, that you looked tired all the time lately. At the time you laughed it off and blamed work stress. But now you understood what they were actually seeing. They were watching someone slowly disappear while trying to keep a life together that no longer aligned with who they were becoming. That memory shook you because it forced you to confront something even deeper. The thing you fought hardest to keep may have been the very thing draining the light out of you little by little. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. But slowly enough that you stopped recognizing yourself while it was happening. And maybe that was why every attempt to return felt blocked in strange ways. Maybe the delays were never random. Maybe the resistance you kept experiencing was not life working against you. Maybe it was protection showing up in forms your emotions could not understand at the time. The canceled plans. The unanswered messages. The sudden exhaustion before certain decisions. The opportunities that disappeared at the last second. You spent so long interpreting those moments as rejection that you never considered another possibility. What if something greater was quietly refusing to let you settle for a life that would eventually break your spirit? The thought made your eyes fill unexpectedly because deep down you knew it was true. You remembered how often your body tried warning you before your mind was ready to listen. The heaviness in your chest. The constant tension. The feeling that something was wrong even during moments that were supposed to make you happy. You ignored all of it because you wanted the story to end differently. But now, standing there in the middle of your dimly lit kitchen with rain falling outside and the clock reading nearly midnight, you finally understood something your heart resisted for far too long. Some doors close because they are not meant to carry your future. And sometimes the greatest protection in your life arrives disguised as disappointment, silence, delay, and endings you never asked for. Over the next several days, the realization followed you everywhere. It showed up during ordinary moments when your mind finally became quiet enough to notice how different you felt now compared to a few months ago. You noticed it while standing in line at the grocery store watching families move through automatic doors carrying bags of food and talking about normal everyday things. You noticed it driving home at sunset while golden light stretched across the highway and the radio played softly in the background. But most of all, you noticed it during the moments when you expected yourself to miss the past more than you actually did. That was the part you could no longer ignore. The emotional pull backward was losing its grip on you little by little, and even though part of you still felt sad about everything that changed, another part of you was quietly beginning to breathe again. One evening after work, you stopped by a bookstore you used to visit years ago before life became so emotionally complicated. The smell of coffee and old paper hit you the moment you walked inside, and for the first time in a long while, you felt a kind of peace that did not depend on anyone else staying or leaving. You wandered slowly through the aisles with no real purpose, letting your mind rest for once instead of constantly replaying old memories. Then, while flipping through a random book near the back corner of the store, a sentence caught your attention so suddenly it almost felt personal. It said that some people spend years praying for clarity while resisting every ending that was sent to give it to them. You stared at those words longer than you expected because deep down, they exposed something you had finally become ready to admit. You were never actually afraid of starting over. You were afraid of accepting that certain chapters truly ended. Because endings force people to grieve not only relationships and dreams, but identities. The version of you that believed love meant enduring constant emotional uncertainty. The version of you that thought being chosen by others determined your worth. The version of you that kept shrinking itself emotionally just to preserve temporary peace. Losing those identities hurt because they once felt necessary for survival. But now, standing quietly beneath warm bookstore lights while soft music echoed overhead, you could feel something changing inside you that no amount of loneliness could reverse anymore. You were beginning to trust the separation. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough to stop fighting it every day. And strangely, the more you stopped resisting the distance, the more clearly you began seeing what the old life was actually doing to you. The constant anxiety. The emotional exhaustion. The pressure to ignore your intuition whenever something felt wrong. You remembered how often you begged for signs while simultaneously dismissing every feeling trying to warn you. Your body always knew before your mind did. That heaviness in your chest. The exhaustion that appeared before certain conversations. The sense of relief you secretly felt whenever plans unexpectedly fell apart even though you told yourself you should be disappointed instead. None of those moments were accidents. They were signals. Quiet forms of guidance showing up through emotions, timing, delays, and interruptions because your spirit understood what your heart was not yet ready to release. And now, looking back honestly, you realized something that changed everything. The life you lost was not fully nourishing you anymore. It was only familiar. There is a difference. Familiarity can feel safe even when it quietly drains your peace over time. But peace itself feels different. It does not leave your body constantly anxious. It does not require you to abandon yourself emotionally just to maintain connection. And maybe that was why your path kept shifting no matter how desperately you tried to force things back together. Because the person you are becoming cannot survive in places that required the old version of you to disappear. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely arrives with certainty at first. Most of the time, it begins quietly through small moments you almost overlook. A deeper breath during a drive home. A night where you finally sleep without replaying old conversations in your head. A morning where you realize you checked your phone less because your peace no longer depends on someone else reaching for you first. Those moments had started happening more often now, and even though part of you was still grieving, another part was beginning to understand why life refused to let you stay where you once begged to remain. One Sunday morning, you woke up earlier than usual without the heaviness that normally sat on your chest the second your eyes opened. Sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, painting pale gold lines across the walls of your apartment, and for a few moments you simply lay there listening to the quiet. No racing thoughts. No urgent need to fix the past. Just stillness. It felt unfamiliar at first because you had spent so long emotionally surviving chaos that peace itself almost felt suspicious. You made coffee slowly that morning, standing barefoot in the kitchen while the smell filled the room, and you realized something that would have terrified the old version of you. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt safe. That realization changed something deep inside you because there was a time when silence immediately triggered loneliness. You used to fill every quiet moment with distractions because being alone with your thoughts felt unbearable. But now, for the first time in a very long while, your own presence no longer felt like something you needed to escape from. Later that afternoon, while organizing old emails on your laptop, you stumbled across messages from months earlier that you had not looked at since everything fell apart. Reading them now felt completely different. Back then, you interpreted every delayed response, every inconsistency, every broken promise as something you needed to work harder to fix. You blamed yourself constantly. You convinced yourself that if you became more patient, more understanding, less emotional, things would eventually stabilize. But now you could see what your exhaustion had been trying to tell you all along. You were carrying relationships and situations that required you to abandon your own peace just to keep them functioning. And no matter how deeply you cared, no healthy future can grow where a person must constantly silence themselves emotionally to maintain connection. That truth hurt, but it also freed something inside you. Because suddenly the endings no longer looked random. The delays no longer looked cruel. Even the loneliness started revealing purpose. It gave you distance long enough to finally see clearly what constant emotional closeness had been blinding you to before. You remembered all the times your body reacted before your mind caught up. The nights you felt anxious for no obvious reason. The unexplained exhaustion before certain plans. The strange relief hidden underneath disappointment whenever something unexpectedly fell through. Those feelings were never there to confuse you. They were trying to protect you while your heart was still negotiating with things your spirit already knew could not come with you into the next chapter of your life. And maybe that is why every attempt to force the old doors back open eventually collapsed under its own weight. Because some paths only feel unbearable to lose until enough time passes for you to realize they were slowly draining the best parts of who you were becoming. Sitting there by the window later that evening while the sky turned soft shades of orange and blue outside, you finally stopped asking why everything changed. Instead, a quieter understanding settled into your spirit. The separation was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to return you to yourself before you disappeared completely, trying to hold on to things that no longer belonged in your future. As winter slowly gave way to the first signs of spring, you started noticing how different your life felt without constantly chasing what was trying to leave. The change was not dramatic enough for strangers to notice, but internally it felt enormous. You no longer woke up every morning with the same desperation to fix everything. You no longer checked your phone hoping for a message that would magically restore the past. In fact, some days would pass where you barely thought about it at all, and when you finally realized that, the silence inside you felt almost sacred. One evening after work, you decided to take the longer route home through the older part of town where the streets were lined with small houses and bare trees still waiting for spring leaves to return. The sky was painted soft shades of gray and gold as the sun lowered behind distant rooftops, and for reasons you could not fully explain, you suddenly felt emotional all over again. Not because you wanted the past back, but because you finally understood how close you came to losing yourself trying to preserve it. You pulled your car into a quiet parking lot near a small public park and sat there with the engine off, watching a few people walk slowly along the path beneath the fading evening light. And for the first time, you stopped blaming yourself for the endings. That shift mattered more than you realized. Because guilt had been quietly following you for months. Guilt for not saying the right thing. Guilt for not trying harder. Guilt for walking away emotionally even when part of you wanted to stay. But sitting there alone with the windows slightly cracked and cold air drifting softly into the car, another truth settled into your spirit with unexpected clarity. You were never meant to carry relationships, environments, or expectations that required you to betray your inner peace in order to keep them alive. Real peace does not demand constant emotional sacrifice just to survive. And once you truly understand that, everything begins changing from the inside out. You started remembering how exhausted you used to feel all the time. The tension in your shoulders that never fully relaxed. The nights you stayed awake overthinking every conversation. The emotional weight of constantly wondering where you stood in people's lives. You normalized that feeling for so long that chaos began feeling familiar and peace began feeling suspicious. But now your body was slowly teaching you something your heart resisted for years. Peace is not supposed to feel confusing. Peace does not constantly make you question your worth. Peace does not disappear every time someone becomes distant. And maybe that was why life kept interrupting every attempt you made to rebuild what already collapsed. Because you were trying to return to emotional environments your spirit had already outgrown. The thought no longer made you angry. Surprisingly, it made you grateful. Grateful for every delay you once called rejection. Grateful for every unanswered prayer that eventually revealed hidden protection. Grateful for every night you sat alone thinking your life was falling apart when in reality something deeper was quietly rebuilding your sense of self underneath all the confusion. You stayed parked there until the streetlights flickered on one by one around the park, and somewhere in that quiet moment you realized something beautiful. The person sitting in that car was not the same person who once begged life to stay unchanged. That version of you was slowly fading now. Not because your heart stopped caring, but because your spirit finally understood that some endings are necessary if a person is ever going to meet the stronger, calmer, more honest version of themselves waiting on the other side of the loss. Not long after that evening in the park, you began noticing how differently you responded to things that once would have shattered your peace. Situations that used to send your mind into panic now felt strangely manageable. You still had emotional moments, of course. Certain songs still carried memories. Certain streets still reminded you of conversations that changed your life. But the desperation was gone now. The constant ache to reverse the past had slowly loosened its grip on your spirit, and in its place was something quieter and far more stable. Acceptance. Not the kind that happens all at once, but the kind that grows slowly through repeated moments of clarity. One Friday night, after staying late at work, you stopped at a small grocery store on the edge of town to pick up a few things before heading home. The store was nearly empty except for an older couple walking slowly through the aisles together and a cashier quietly humming along to music playing overhead. As you pushed your cart through the fluorescent light and familiar smell of fresh bread and coffee, you suddenly realized something that almost made you stop walking. For the first time in months, you felt completely present in your own life again. Not trapped in old memories. Not emotionally stuck between what was and what could have been. Just present. And that simple feeling hit deeper than you expected because there was a time when your thoughts never left the past long enough for you to experience the moment you were actually living in. You used to carry emotional noise everywhere. Into grocery stores. Into work meetings. Into quiet nights alone. Even moments that should have felt peaceful were overshadowed by unanswered questions and silent grief. But now, standing there under bright grocery store lights with a carton of milk in one hand and cold rain tapping softly against the windows outside, your mind finally felt still. Not empty. Not numb. Just still. That was when you understood something your heart could only learn through distance. Peace is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly after enough separation from what once disturbed your spirit. Sometimes healing feels less like dramatic transformation and more like finally being able to breathe deeply again without carrying constant emotional tension in your chest. You drove home slowly that night through wet streets reflecting yellow streetlights across the pavement, and somewhere during that quiet drive another realization surfaced. The life you lost was not the only future available to you. For so long you treated one closed chapter as though it meant the end of your entire story. But now you could finally see how small your world became while you were emotionally attached to things that no longer aligned with who you truly were. You forgot there were still places you had not seen, people you had not met, versions of yourself you had not become yet. And maybe that was why the old life had to fall apart. Not because you failed, but because your future required more space than your past was willing to give you. The thought stayed with you as you parked outside your apartment and sat quietly for a moment listening to the rain soften against the windshield. Months ago, silence like this would have made you feel abandoned. Now it felt almost sacred. Like the kind of stillness that appears after surviving emotional storms you thought would never end. You realized then that healing was never about forgetting the past or pretending it did not matter. It was about becoming someone who no longer needed to return to what once wounded them in order to feel whole again. And deep down, maybe you already knew that the reason certain doors never reopened was because the person standing in front of them no longer belonged on the other side. Several weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, you found yourself awake before the rest of the city again. But this time the silence felt different. The kind of silence that no longer carried fear inside it. Pale sunlight drifted slowly across the floor of your apartment while the world outside remained soft and still, and as you stood near the window holding a warm cup of coffee in both hands, you realized something that would have seemed impossible not long ago. You were no longer waiting for your old life to return. The thought came gently, almost unexpectedly, but once it arrived you could not deny it. Somewhere between all the sleepless nights, the unanswered questions, the delays, the loneliness, and the endings you fought so hard against, you had changed. Not perfectly. Not completely. But deeply enough that the person you are now could no longer fully belong to the life you once begged to keep. And strangely, instead of sadness, the realization filled you with peace. You looked outside at the empty street below where rain from the night before still glistened softly on the pavement, and memories drifted through your mind one final time. The nights you sat on the kitchen floor trying to understand why everything was slipping away. The drives through dark streets replaying old conversations in your head. The moments you almost went backward simply because loneliness made the past feel safer than the unknown future waiting ahead of you. At the time, every interruption felt cruel. Every delay felt personal. Every closed door felt like rejection. But now, standing quietly in the stillness of a new morning, you finally understood something your heart had resisted for so long. Some endings arrive not to punish you, but to prevent you from building your future inside places where your spirit could no longer breathe. That truth changed the way you saw everything. You no longer viewed the separation as proof that you failed. You saw it as proof that something inside you refused to disappear completely, even when you tried to force yourself to stay where you no longer belonged. And maybe that was the quiet presence guiding you all along. Not through loud answers or dramatic signs, but through exhaustion when your heart was moving in the wrong direction. Through silence when you were emotionally attached to things your future could not carry. Through strange delays that protected you before you understood what they were protecting you from. Looking back now, you could finally see how many times your spirit tried to lead you gently away from situations that slowly drained your peace. But pain has a way of making people cling tightly to familiarity, even when familiarity is hurting them. That is why the journey had to unfold slowly. You had to live through the confusion long enough to recognize the difference between attachment and alignment. Between loneliness and true connection. Between losing something and losing yourself. The old version of you could not understand those things yet. But the person standing here now finally can. You walked toward the window and cracked it open slightly, letting cool morning air drift into the apartment while distant church bells echoed softly somewhere across the city. The sound lingered gently in the silence around you, and for the first time in a very long while, you did not feel the need to chase answers anymore. You simply stood there breathing quietly, aware that life was still unfolding in ways you could not fully see yet. And maybe that is what peace actually is. Not having every answer, but finally trusting that the doors which closed behind you were never meant to hold your future forever.